Imagine walking into a room filled with billionaires, and the first thing they do is laugh at you. They see you not as a founder, not as a visionary, but as a waitress who doesn't belong. Now imagine, just hours later, walking out of that same room with a $50 million investment, while the man who mocked you is left in ruins. Sounds like a movie, right? But this isn't fiction. This is Naomi Ellis's story. And tonight, on your channel, we're going to witness how a single mother turned humiliation into the greatest victory of her life. Let's dive in. The ballroom glittered beneath the chandeliers of the Beverly Hills Four Seasons, a cathedral of wealth where every laugh was polished and every glance calculated. Waiters in crisp uniforms weaved through the crowd with trays of Bordeaux and champagne, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. Tonight was no ordinary dinner. It was a gathering of the city's most powerful investors, the kind of event where billion-dollar deals were whispered over dessert. At the center of it all, Charles Drake held court. The CEO of Drake Nova leaned back in his chair, a glass of wine in hand, surrounded by admirers. He was the kind of man who filled a room not with charm, but with dominance. A booming laugh, a dismissive wave, the smug certainty of someone who had never been told no. Tonight, he was moments away from finalizing a deal that would tighten his grip on the market. He expected applause. He expected coronation. And then on the edge of the room sat Naomi Ellis. She didn't look like anyone else here. While the other guests dripped in jewels and tailored suits, Naomi wore a simple black dress she had borrowed from a friend. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, but her presence was almost invisible. Few noticed her. Fewer still remembered her name. But one man did. Charles's eyes flicked across the room, and recognition sparked. A smirk tugged at his mouth. Of course, he knew her. She had served him once, not in a boardroom, but in a restaurant, where she had carried trays of wine to his table. And now here she was, daring to sit among titans, daring to call herself a founder. The irony was too delicious for him to ignore. Naomi felt his gaze, heavy and mocking, but she didn't lower her eyes. She had walked into this room knowing what she was up against. She wasn't here to dazzle anyone with gowns or titles. She was here because Elliot Strauss, the elusive, legendary investor, had extended an invitation. And though she didn't know why, she had accepted. What no one in this glittering hall knew was that Naomi Ellis was a mother, a single mother. At home, her 4-year-old daughter slept in a small bed cluttered with stuffed animals, her tiny chest rising and falling unevenly from the illness that had shadowed her short life. Every hospital bill, every treatment, every doctor's appointment had been a battle. Naomi worked days on BridgeLink, the startup she had built from nothing, designed to connect families like hers with healthcare and opportunities they couldn't otherwise reach. And at night, when the bills piled too high, she picked up shifts as a waitress. To her, neither job was shameful. Both were survival. Both were love. But here, in this ballroom of billionaires, survival was not enough. Already she could hear the murmurs at the nearby tables. "Isn't that the waitress? Who invited her?" The words stung, but she forced herself to sit tall, to steady her breathing. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here for a chance to build a bridge not just for her daughter, but for millions of families who lived in the shadows of a system that had forgotten them. Across the table, Elliot Strauss sipped his water, silent and unreadable. The man known as the Oracle of the West was famous for spotting talent where no one else looked. Naomi wondered if that was why he had invited her, or if this was just another test she was destined to fail. The music swelled, glasses clinked, and Charles Drake, smirking like a wolf circling prey, leaned forward. He had seen her. He remembered her. And he was not about to let the room forget who she used to be. Naomi's chest tightened. The night had only just begun.
Naomi Ellis hadn't planned to end up here, not in this ballroom, not in this war of glances and whispers. Her life was never supposed to touch theirs. She grew up in Inglewood, in a small apartment that smelled of laundry detergent and fried onions. Her mother worked double shifts as a nurse's aide. Her father disappeared before she could spell his name. Responsibility wasn't something Naomi learned, it was something she inherited. By 17, she had mastered the art of making a dollar stretch like elastic. By 19, she was balancing 2 jobs in community college. And by 23, she was a mother. Her daughter Leela arrived on a warm spring evening. Small, fragile, perfect. Naomi had never known love like that moment. A kind of love that was equal parts joy and terror. She held her daughter close and swore, no matter what it took, she would give this child a life better than her own. But within months, the diagnoses began. Leela had a chronic respiratory condition, the kind of illness that didn't end lives quickly but chipped away at them slowly, demanding medication, checkups, therapies. It wasn't lethal, not yet, but it was relentless. The bills piled up like bricks. Insurance covered some, but never enough. Naomi found herself staring at statements with numbers that didn't even look real. Thousands for hospital stays, hundreds for inhalers. Every dollar she earned vanished before it touched her hands. So, she worked. Day shifts in admin offices, night shifts waiting tables. On weekends, she delivered groceries through apps. It didn't matter if the customers tipped well or if the restaurant manager barked, she smiled, she nodded, she carried on. Because every hour was another pill, another appointment, another breath for Leela. Yet Naomi wasn't just surviving. In the cracks between shifts, she was building something. She had seen too much of the system's cruelty, too many families crushed under red tape and indifference. She started sketching out ideas, researching late at night when Leela was finally asleep. What if there was a platform, a real, usable tool that helped families navigate this nightmare? What if no one else had to drown the way she had? That question became BridgeLink. At first, it was just a spreadsheet and a dream. Naomi taught herself basic coding from YouTube tutorials, begged advice from engineers she met while serving them coffee. She pitched her idea to small nonprofits, gathered feedback from exhausted parents in hospital waiting rooms. Every no was fuel. Every tiny yes was oxygen. Within a year, she had a prototype. Within 2, she had families using it. It wasn't pretty, the interface clunky, the funding non-existent, but it worked. Parents could track appointments, connect with therapists, even access discounted supplies through pooled purchasing. And for the first time, Naomi felt like she wasn't just surviving, she was building. Still, the irony wasn't lost on her. By day, she was the founder of a healthcare startup. By night, she was wiping tables at a steakhouse where billionaires left tips larger than her rent. Sometimes she would carry wine to a table and overhear conversations about seed rounds and exit strategies. She'd smile politely, refill the glass, and return to the kitchen. But in her head, she was already there, already part of that world, even if they couldn't see her yet. That was how she first crossed paths with Charles Drake. Months earlier, she had been working a private dinner at a West Hollywood restaurant. Drake had walked in with his entourage, loud and entitled. He didn't look at her when he ordered, he didn't thank her when she poured his Bordeaux, but when she accidentally brushed his sleeve with a tray, he snapped, "Careful, sweetheart, these hands are worth more than your yearly wage." The table laughed. Naomi apologized, cheeks burning, and carried on. But she remembered, not the insult, she had endured worse, but the certainty with which he had delivered it, the belief that he was untouchable. Now here he was again, same arrogance, same glass of Bordeaux, only this time, she wasn't carrying the tray. Naomi glanced around the ballroom, catching fragments of conversation, IPO projections, political donations, art collections. She knew she didn't belong by their standards, but she also knew belonging was overrated. She hadn't built BridgeLink to be invited into their world. She had built it so her daughter, and millions like her, could breathe easier in theirs. Still, she couldn't ignore the unease in her stomach. She had been invited tonight by Elliot Strauss himself, the investor whose decisions shaped industries. Why her? Why now? She suspected it wasn't a gift. More likely, it was a test. And Naomi Ellis had spent her whole life passing tests no one thought she could. She thought of Leela, curled up back home with her stuffed giraffe, breathing through the soft hiss of the humidifier. Naomi whispered to herself, so softly no one else could hear, "This is for you." The chandeliers sparkled, laughter rose and fell, and somewhere across the room, Charles Drake's smirk widened. The game was about to begin.
The dinner began like a performance. Crystal glasses caught the light, silverware clinked in rhythm, and the hum of conversation rose and fell like orchestrated music. The Four Seasons ballroom had been transformed into a theater of wealth, and at its center sat Charles Drake, lead actor, director, and self-declared king. He was hard to miss. Tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair slicked back to a mirror shine. Charles carried himself with the kind of swagger that only came from decades of unchecked success. His suit was custom-tailored, his cufflinks engraved with his initials, his laughter booming so loudly it drowned out the string quartet. Around him clustered the hungry and the hopeful. Young executives eager for his approval. Politicians angling for donations, startups desperate for a check. He basked in it, feeding off their need. Naomi watched from her seat near the far edge of the U-shaped table. She wasn't placed at the center, where the heavy hitters traded glances and sealed alliances. She was at the periphery, close enough to observe, far enough to be ignored. And ignored she was. At first. "Isn't that her?" whispered a woman across the table, her diamond bracelet glittering as she leaned toward her husband. "I'm sure I've seen her before." Her husband squinted, tilting his head. "Oh, yes, she was a waitress at, what was it, Morton's or maybe Del Mar. I swear she served our table once." Naomi kept her face still, but her stomach tightened. She knew whispers would follow her here, but hearing them said aloud still burned. A man in a navy suit chuckled. "So, what is she doing here? Waitressing for billionaires 1 month, pitching to them the next? Bold." The group laughed softly, as though she were an amusing anecdote rather than a human being sitting 6 feet away. Naomi inhaled slowly through her nose, reminding herself she hadn't come here to win their approval. She had come here because Elliot Strauss had sent the invitation, and she wasn't about to waste it. But across the table, Charles Drake had noticed. He set his glass down, his eyes narrowing as recognition sharpened. The smirk spread slow and deliberate across his face. He remembered. Naomi Ellis. The waitress who had brushed his sleeve months ago, earning his scorn and his joke at her expense. And now, impossibly, she was seated among him and his peers, daring to look composed in borrowed silk. Charles thrived on hierarchy. To him, the world was divided neatly, those who served and those who were served. Naomi had been firmly in the first category. The idea that she might climb into the second was, to his mind, both laughable and offensive. He leaned toward the man beside him, whispering just loud enough for the sound to carry. "Do you see her? The little waitress? Now she's calling herself a founder." The table erupted in quiet chuckles. Naomi felt their eyes. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she kept her chin high. If she faltered now, if she shrank back, they would win. She forced herself to look past them, past Charles's smirk, toward Elliot Strauss, sitting further down the table. Strauss was unreadable. He hadn't joined the laughter. He hadn't even glanced up. He stirred his glass of water, his face a mask. Naomi couldn't tell if that was indifference or interest, but either way it reminded her this was a test. Dinner moved forward. Plates of foie gras and filet mignon appeared. Wine flowed, the chatter grew louder. Every so often, Charles would make another cutting remark, aimed loosely enough to pass as banter, but sharp enough that Naomi knew the target. She looks more comfortable carrying plates than carrying equity. Startups these days, anyone with a laptop thinks they're a CEO. I'll bet her business model is tips and sympathy. The words drew polite laughter from his circle. For Charles, this was foreplay, setting the stage for the humiliation he knew would come. Naomi pressed her palms together under the table. She thought of Leela, of long nights in the ER and mornings balancing spreadsheets before dawn. She reminded herself that every insult tonight meant nothing compared to the reason she was here. Then the master of ceremonies tapped his glass, calling for silence. It was time for introductions. Each founder in attendance would share a few words about their company. Charles leaned back, smug. He had done this dance 1,000 times. The room always bent to him. But when Naomi's name was called, his smirk widened. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. Naomi rose, smoothing her dress with steady hands. Her heart hammered, but her voice, when it came, was calm. She began to introduce BridgeLink, her words clear and deliberate. And Charles Drake, predator in silk, leaned forward with a gleam in his eye. He was ready to pounce.
The introductions moved around the table, one founder after another standing to describe their companies. Tech startups boasting AI breakthroughs, finance apps promising disruption, biotech firms armed with patents and jargon. Each received polite nods, scattered applause, and in some cases laughter that sounded a little too eager to please. Naomi listened carefully, noting the cadence, the buzzwords, the way some founders seemed to pitch more to Charles than to the entire room. She knew she wasn't here to outshine them with flash. She only needed to stand her ground. But Charles had other plans. As a waiter passed behind him with a tray of glasses, one stem tilted precariously. The young server, no older than 19, tried to steady it, but his hands shook under the weight of the silver tray. A dark splash of Bordeaux slipped over the rim, landing on the edge of the pristine tablecloth. It was nothing, barely a stain, but Charles seized it like a gift. He leaned back in his chair, his voice booming across the table. "Careful there! Looks like we've got a crisis." His eyes flicked deliberately to Naomi. The smirk was back, cruel and certain. "Maybe Miss Ellis can help. After all, this is her area of expertise." Laughter rippled through the nearby guests. The young server froze, his face pale, his tray trembling even harder now. Naomi's pulse quickened. She understood exactly what Charles was doing, forcing her back into the box he believed she belonged in. Every instinct told her to ignore him, to refuse the bait. But then, she saw the boy's expression, wide-eyed, humiliated, one mistake away from losing a job he desperately needed. Naomi stood. Gasps whispered across the table as she moved to the server's side. With practiced hands, she steadied the tray, shifted the glasses, and dabbed the tablecloth with a folded napkin. Her movements were calm, efficient, the muscle memory of years working late shifts to pay for hospital bills. "There we go," she said softly to the boy, giving him a reassuring nod. His shoulders loosened with relief. But Charles wasn't finished. He leaned forward, raising his glass like a toast. "See? Some people never forget their true calling." His words were slow, deliberate, meant for every ear in the room. A waitress at heart. Carrying trays suits her far better than carrying equity. The laughter this time was louder, sharper. Naomi could feel the sting in her chest, the way their eyes branded her. But instead of sitting down quickly, instead of shrinking, she straightened her spine and stayed on her feet. Her voice was steady, clear enough for the entire table to hear. "You're right, Mr. Drake. I haven't forgotten. I have worked as a waitress. I still do, sometimes. Because work is work. Serving a table to pay for my daughter's medicine is just as honest as building a company to change lives. Both require discipline, both require dignity, and I don't see either as shameful." The laughter faltered. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Naomi glanced at the young server, then back to Charles. "But I'll tell you what is shameful. Using someone's past to diminish their present, as if honest work makes a person less worthy. I've seen people like that before. They mistake arrogance for strength, and they forget that one day the same hands that carry trays might build something bigger than their empire." For a moment, silence spread across the table like a wave. Charles's smirk faltered, only slightly, before he forced it back into place. He gave a dismissive chuckle, lifting his glass again. "Touching, truly. But this is a room for visionaries, not sob stories. Let's not confuse the two." The tension broke as a few chuckles followed his lead, although they sounded weaker now. Naomi returned to her seat, her face calm, though her heart hammered. She hadn't planned that speech. It had simply risen, the truth too heavy to hold back. Across the table, Elliot Strauss finally looked up. His eyes met Naomi's, and for the first time that evening, she saw something in them. Interest. He didn't speak, not yet, but his silence felt different now. Sharper, more deliberate. The young server passed her again minutes later, his tray lighter now. He whispered a quick, shaky, "Thank you." Naomi gave him a small smile. She knew Charles wasn't finished, but neither was she.
The applause that followed the next founder's introduction sounded hollow to Naomi's ears. Her words still lingered in the air, and though Charles had laughed them off, she could feel the subtle shift in the room. Some guests avoided her gaze now, uncomfortable. Others studied her more carefully, as though seeing her for the first time. But Charles Drake wasn't a man who tolerated losing control. The moment Naomi's name was called for her official introduction, he leaned forward, elbows resting on the white linen tablecloth, eyes glittering with amusement. "Naomi Ellis," the MC announced, "founder of BridgeLink, a healthcare technology platform." Naomi rose. Her palms itched, but her voice was steady. BridgeLink was born from necessity. It's a platform designed to help families. Families? Oh, here we go. The interruption earned polite laughter from his corner of the table. Naomi pressed on, refusing to glance his way. To connect with doctors, therapists, and resources they often can't access. Families like mine. Families who are drowning in medical bills and bureaucracy. Charming. So it's charity then. Another feel-good app designed to win sympathy points? Naomi paused. The old version of herself might have shrunk, might have swallowed the words, but tonight was different. She looked directly at him. "No, it's business. A big one." Gasps scattered down the table at the audacity of her tone. Charles tilted his head, mock intrigued. "Do enlighten us. How does wiping away tears translate into profit?" Naomi drew in a breath, then let the numbers do the talking. There are 61 million Americans living with disabilities. That's 1 in 4 adults. Together, they represent a consumer market worth nearly $70 billion annually, and yet the majority of tech platforms ignore them, leaving families scrambling between hospitals, schools, and insurers. BridgeLink isn't just helping people. It's capturing an underserved market that's been invisible for decades. The laughter in the room thinned. A few brows furrowed. A few pens scribbled notes. Naomi saw the shift and leaned into it. Already, over 20,000 users are on our beta platform. We've partnered with 3 rehabilitation centers in Los Angeles, and early data shows families are saving an average of 15% on out-of-pocket costs. That's not charity. That's efficiency. That's impact. For the first time that night, Charles's smirk flickered. But he recovered quickly, swirling his wine glass with a theatrical sigh. Impressive, rehearsed speech. But tell me, Miss Ellis, what happens when the donors dry up? When the sob stories fade? Do you really think serious investors are lining up to fund your bridge? She let the silence stretch a beat, then answered, calm and deliberate. I don't need sympathy. I don't need donors. What I need, and what I already have, are customers. And customers don't fade. A ripple ran through the guests. Some nodded, others whispered. One man near the center of the table actually muttered, "She's not wrong." Charles heard it too. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward, voice dropping lower, sharper. "Listen carefully. This room is not for people like you. It's for winners. People who understand markets, not fairy tales. You think a sob story makes you my equal? You think playing waitress one night and founder the next makes you belong here?" Naomi held his gaze. The weight of the entire room pressed down on her, but she didn't blink. "I don't think I belong here. I know I do. Because I've built something real, and real has a way of outlasting arrogance." The words landed like a stone in water, sending ripples through the silence. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then, slowly, a woman, 2 seats down, gave a single nod. Someone else adjusted his tie, suddenly serious. The atmosphere had shifted again, subtle but undeniable. Charles scoffed, sitting back with exaggerated ease. "We'll see. These rooms eat idealists alive." Naomi returned to her seat, her heart pounding but her face calm. She had expected humiliation tonight. Instead, she had planted something else: doubt. And across the table, Elliot Strauss finally set down his glass of water. His eyes lingered on Naomi for a long moment, unreadable, before he turned back to his plate. It was enough. Naomi knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt the balance begin to tilt.
The dinner resumed, but the energy had shifted. Forks scraped porcelain, glasses clinked, yet the easy laughter from earlier was gone. Naomi had struck a nerve, though no one would admit it outright. Charles Drake sensed it too. He lounged back in his chair, swirling his wine with deliberate calm, but his eyes followed her like a hawk's, sharp, waiting for the moment she slipped. Naomi knew she couldn't wait for permission anymore. The murmurs in the room were an opening, and if she didn't seize it, Charles would bury her under another wave of mockery. So she stood. No microphone, no slides, no polished stage. Just her voice in a room designed to drown out people like her. "Forgive me," she said, and immediately the conversation stilled. She wasn't loud, but something in her tone carried, a steadiness that cut through the clamor. "I realize I'm not what many of you expected tonight. I've heard the whispers. That I don't belong here, that I'm a waitress pretending to be a founder. And you know what? You're not wrong. I am both." A few gasps flickered through the air. No one had expected her to own it. "I wait tables when the rent is due, when the hospital bills for my daughter stack higher than I can count. I do whatever I have to do, and I'm not ashamed of it, because it's honest, because it means my daughter breathes easier for another night." Silence. Even the servers paused in their steps. "But I'm also a founder, and I built BridgeLink because I was tired of watching families like mine get crushed by a system that doesn't care if we survive. I built it because there are millions of us and no one is building for us. Until now." Her words began to gather strength, rising above the clink of cutlery. "BridgeLink isn't charity, it's infrastructure. It's the difference between a mother losing her job because she can't coordinate care and that same mother being able to keep food on the table. It's the difference between a child missing months of school and a child getting the therapy they need. And every one of those differences translates into real value, not just human value, economic value." Naomi saw heads tilting now, attention sharpening. She pressed forward. "We are currently serving 20,000 families. With every 1% increase in efficiency, they save millions collectively. That's money redirected into groceries, into rent, into actual life. And on a macro scale, it's billions in untapped market potential, a market ignored because people like me were considered invisible." She let that hang in the air. "Tonight, you have laughed at me. You have called me a waitress. And you're right. I've carried trays. I've scrubbed dishes. I've done whatever work I had to do so my daughter could live. But let me be clear, the fact that I have served tables doesn't disqualify me from building tables. In fact, it makes me better at it, because I know exactly who's being left outside the room." Her voice trembled just slightly now, but it wasn't weakness. It was raw, unpolished truth. "And if that disqualifies me from your world, so be it. But don't mistake humility for weakness. Don't mistake survival for lack of vision. Bridgelink will grow, with or without this room's approval, because families like mine don't have the luxury of waiting for permission." She stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Somewhere in the back, a fork dropped onto a plate with a sharp clink. No one laughed this time. Charles broke it, of course. He leaned back, slow clapping with exaggerated mockery. "Bravo! Truly inspiring. A single mother's tale of triumph. But let's be honest, Ms. Ellis, investors don't bankroll bedtime stories. They bankroll returns." The sneer in his voice tried to drag the room back to his side. A few chuckles scattered uncertainly, but the current had shifted too far. Naomi's words had landed. People weren't laughing as easily now. Elliot Strauss finally moved. He adjusted his cufflinks, set his glass of water aside, and leaned forward ever so slightly. His eyes were on Naomi, sharp, calculating. She felt it, the scrutiny, the weight of his assessment. For the first time that night, her heart leapt not from fear, but from possibility. She had taken her stand. The room could laugh, Charles could sneer, but the truth was already in the air, undeniable. Naomi sat down, her chest still heaving, her palms damp against her lap. She had no idea if she had won anything tonight, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had not lost herself.
For most of the evening, Elliot Strauss had been a ghost at the table. He rarely spoke, barely reacted, content to sip water while others drowned in wine and ego. That was his reputation, a man who listened more than he talked, who let everyone else reveal themselves before he revealed anything at all. But now, after Naomi's words had settled over the room like dust after a storm, all eyes turned toward him. Charles Drake noticed it first, the way people glanced past him, their attention shifting to the silent figure down the table. Panic flared beneath his calm exterior. He needed to regain control. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's not confuse sentiment with substance. Bridgelink is a touching story, yes, but startups aren't built on pity. They're built on hard metrics. And with all due respect, I don't see any serious investor here ready to throw money at a charity app." The room shifted uncomfortably. No one laughed this time. Elliot Strauss set his napkin down with meticulous care. Then he cleared his throat, a small sound, but it silenced the entire hall. "Mr. Drake," he said, his voice calm, measured, but carrying the weight of decades. "You've spoken at length tonight, perhaps too much." A murmur rippled through the room. Charles stiffened. "Excuse me?" Elliot's gaze was steady, unwavering. "You mock a woman for waiting tables while building a company from nothing. I see resilience. You dismiss her platform as sentiment. I see a market you've been too arrogant to notice. You treat humility as weakness. I consider it a strength." Naomi's breath caught. She hadn't expected defense, let alone from him. Elliot leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "I've been listening, and I'll tell you what I hear. From you, Mr. Drake, noise. From Miss Ellis, vision. She sees not just a problem, but a solution. Not just charity, but commerce. And if you're too blind to see the difference, then perhaps you've forgotten what it means to be an entrepreneur." The silence was absolute now, thick with tension. Charles tried to laugh it off. "Come now, Elliot, surely you're not suggesting—" But Elliot cut him off, his voice firm. "I am. Tonight was meant to be a test of who deserves my partnership. And you have failed." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped their fork. Charles's face drained of color. Elliot continued, his tone like a gavel striking. "Drake Nova has grown complacent, arrogant. You mistake dominance for leadership. I have no interest in attaching my name to a sinking ship steered by a man too full of himself to recognize the future." Then he turned, slowly, deliberately, to Naomi. "But Bridgelink, that I will back. 50 million, effective immediately." The ballroom exploded. Some gasped, some clapped, others shouted questions all at once. Cameras flashed from the back of the room. The air buzzed with the shock of a tectonic shift. Naomi froze, stunned. 50 million? She could barely comprehend the number. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Charles lurched forward, his voice breaking with fury. "This is absurd. She's unproven, unqualified. You can't just throw away capital on some sob story." Elliot didn't even flinch. "Capital is not thrown away when it's invested in vision. And I would rather stake my future on a single mother fighting for millions of forgotten families than on a man who fights only for himself." The room erupted again, half in awe, half in scandal. Charles's face burned crimson, his jaw working furiously as though searching for words he no longer possessed. Naomi's eyes blurred with tears she tried desperately to hold back. She managed to whisper, "Thank you," though her voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. Elliot's gaze softened for the briefest moment. "Don't thank me. Build it. Prove me right." The cameras captured it all. Charles's downfall, Naomi's rise, Elliot's quiet authority. In one evening, the hierarchy of the room had been rewritten. And for the first time all night, Naomi felt the impossible. She wasn't just surviving. She was winning.
The ballroom had become a storm. Reporters scribbled frantically, phones buzzed with alerts, and guests whispered in disbelief. What had begun as a coronation for Charles Drake was now his undoing. And at the center of it all stood Naomi Ellis. Not a waitress, not an outsider, but a founder who had forced the world to see her. Charles slammed his glass down, the sound sharp as a gunshot. His composure cracked, fury spilling across his face. "This is insanity! A woman with no pedigree, no board, no experience!" But the room no longer belonged to him. His voice was just noise. Guests were no longer nodding at his outbursts. They were turning away, whispering about Bridgelink, about Elliot Strauss's seismic endorsement. In the world of finance, perception was currency, and Charles's balance had just plummeted. Naomi remained seated, her hands trembling under the tablecloth. 50 million. The number still felt unreal. She thought of her daughter, of bills stacked on the counter back home, of the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering how much longer she could keep everything afloat. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest lifted. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. She caught the young server's eye across the room. He gave her the smallest smile, a silent thank you for stepping in earlier. Naomi smiled back, realizing he had witnessed it all. Her humiliation, her defiance, her triumph. The dinner wound down in chaos. Guests left buzzing with gossip, half in awe of Strauss, half in disbelief that Charles Drake had been humbled so publicly. Charles himself stormed out, his entourage scrambling after him. Only when the noise faded did Elliot Strauss approach Naomi. "You handled yourself well," he said simply. His voice wasn't flattering, just factual. Not polished, not rehearsed, but honest. That's rarer than you think. Naomi found her voice. "Why me? Why invite me here at all?" Elliot studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Because I wanted to see if you could survive this room, if you could face contempt and still stand your ground. Most people can't, but you did, which means you might survive the bigger rooms to come." She swallowed hard, nodding. He offered his hand. "Let's build your bridge." Naomi shook it, her grip firm despite the trembling in her chest. That night, when she returned home, her daughter Leela was asleep, her small frame curled against a stuffed giraffe, the humidifier humming softly beside her bed. Naomi stood in the doorway, watching her child breathe, and felt tears spill freely down her cheeks. For years, she had carried trays and endured insults to keep this little girl alive. Tonight, she had carried something heavier, the weight of judgment, ridicule, arrogance. And she had not broken. She knelt beside Leela, whispering, "We're going to be okay, baby. We're going to build something better." In the quiet glow of the nightlight, it no longer felt like a promise whispered in desperation. It felt like truth.
The story spread like wildfire in the days that followed. Headlines splashed across financial news. From waitress to founder, Strauss bets big on single mother's startup. Charles Drake humiliated at gala as Strauss picks underdog. Social media buzzed with clips of Naomi's words. "Serving tables doesn't disqualify me from building tables." Her defiance became a rallying cry, a beacon for dreamers who had been told they didn't belong. Bridgelink's website crashed under the surge of new users. Emails flooded in from families across the country thanking her, asking how they could join, how they could help. Naomi worked through it all, exhausted but energized. For the first time, she wasn't building in the dark. She wasn't invisible. And when she looked at her daughter, at the child whose every breath had fueled her fight, Naomi knew the truth. She hadn't just won funding. She had won the right to stand tall. The right to be seen not as a waitress or a sob story, but as what she truly was, a founder, a mother, a builder of bridges. And for the first time in her life, Naomi Ellis allowed herself to believe what the world was finally starting to see. She belonged.
Naomi's story is more than a dramatic dinner clash. It's a reminder that resilience often grows in the toughest soil. For years, she carried trays, scrubbed dishes, and worked 3 jobs, all while caring for her sick daughter. Society told her that made her small. But what Naomi proved is that humility is not weakness, it's strength in disguise. Charles Drake represents the old guard, arrogant, dismissive, blinded by his own success. People like him see titles, resumes, and pedigrees as the only currency. But Elliot Strauss, the man who truly mattered in that room, saw something different. He saw a founder who had been battle-tested by life itself. The lesson? Your background does not disqualify you from greatness. Being underestimated can be fuel. Every insult, every laugh, every closed door is proof that you're still pushing against the tide, and that means you're moving. In business and in life, the people who survive are not always the smartest or the richest. They're the ones who keep standing after being knocked down. Naomi stood, not once, but again and again, until the world had no choice but to recognize her. And that's the true bridge she built, not just a company, but a path for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. If Naomi's story hit you as hard as it hit me, then don't just leave quietly. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Tenkan, because we've got even more stories like this coming your way. But I also want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated?
laughed at, or told you didn't belong? What did you do in that moment? Drop your experience in the comments. Your story might just inspire someone else watching tonight. And if you enjoyed this journey, make sure to stick around because tomorrow's story will take us inside another shocking showdown. One where the person everyone counted out delivered the most unexpected twist of all. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.